Good morning, everybody, to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School. We are delighted that you're all here, and we are going to have a very special time again today. Acts chapter 17 from the New Revised Standard Version. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also, some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities." This was because he was telling them the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus and asked him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us. We would like to know what it means." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in front of them and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship is unknown, this I proclaim to you, the God who made the world and everything in it. He who is Lord of heaven and earth does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of their places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." At this time, Paul left them, but some joined him, and others became followers along with him. Let's pray. We find in this passage, we got an interesting juxtaposition of how much the Greek culture gave Christianity. It's perhaps Christianity's most elegant definition of God as the one in whom we live and move and find our being. Mm-hmm. That came from the Greek poets. And for that, we are most grateful. On the other hand, we see that when Paul mentioned the resurrection, some had very strong reservations, not because they didn't believe it was scientifically possible, but they weren't persuaded that the resurrection of the body was such a good thing. So here we have this tension. We learn so much from the Greek culture, and then there's some hesitancy as well. Now, today we have somebody who can guide us through this very important topic, and we plan to learn much from her, and we acknowledge your presence in our midst. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. We have a most wonderful guest, and I will try to summarize her life, at least in part, because it's a pretty interesting life. So our guest today is not a guest. She's a regular member of our community, Anastasia Stevens. And here goes her life. Born in Athens and stayed there until she was finished with secondary school, I think. Then the next time we find her, the next time I find her, she's in Southern California. Now there's a story between Athens and Southern California, and I hope we hear about that story. But here she is in Southern California, and she goes to school at Cal State San Bernardino, where she emphasizes, I should say, majors in French, I think, and comparative literature. Then goes to UCR and does a degree there in comparative literature. And that focuses on classical and modern and Greek thought, and a thesis on the role of Greek thought in the 20th century with an emphasis upon the journey of Odyssey, right? The Odyssey in the 21st century. I must say that Roy Branson would have loved that. The theme of the journey was just one that he really thought was a good one. So she does their interdisciplinary work in Christianity and in modern thought and in French thought. Then she also gets her secondary teaching credential and credential to teach French at the higher level. Now comes a very rich professional life. And since I taught at one place for 46 years, I was a little amazed that Anastasia taught at so many different places. And I thought about that, and the idea came to my mind. I think in America, in the United States, many schools are willing to have people graduate with no exposure to classical literature, and that some are willing and happy to have them take one course, maybe even part of a course in Western civilization. So it's hard to put together a whole department of classical literature and hard to put a full-time job in that. So it's a very complicated situation. But here we go. These are the universities at which she has taught. Eastern University in Pennsylvania, Concordia University in Irvine. I think that's a Lutheran school. The
Yes.
first school is a Baptist school, American Baptist school, Northern Baptist school, then Concordia, and then Western University in Anaheim, Orange Coast College in Costa Mesa, UCLA, then the Hellenic American Institute of Language and Culture in Athens. No less. But she also has taught at the secondary level at Adventist schools in Highland and in Anaheim. Also at a high school related to the University of California at Irvine, and then something called the Century High School in Santa Ana. So at the secondary level and at the tertiary level, she has done much teaching. Now, in addition to all of that, she has been a consultant at Amgen Incorporation in Thousand Oaks, and then at Villanova University, involved in a very interesting research project that resulted in a book titled James Madison, The Legacy of the Classical Republicanism. That's what it is. Okay, now shift a little bit further, and here are some of the groups to which she belongs. The Hellenic American Council, St. Paul's Orthodox Church, St. Luke's Orthodox Church. That one is in Beaumont. The other one is in Southern California, Irvine. Then she is a part of an International Society for Socratic Studies and the Association of Greek American Professional Women. And she's a member of the Pi Delta Phi Honor Society for Academic French Scholarship for life, right? For life. Now, have I missed anything?
No, thank you so much.
Okay, it's a rich.
Sorry for that.
Oh, it's a rich, very rich
Thank
experience
you.
you've had. So let's hear about your life. Where do you want to begin?
Okay. You want me to start?
Yes. If you don't mind, yeah, let's go.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, the title of a book I started many years ago, but still unfinished. It's On My Way to Ithaca, taken from a verse from a poem called Ithica. And since my thesis was classical myth in the sense of C.S. Lewis, not mythology, in the 20th century, the journey, the Odysseus theme of human condition and God's nature. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, David. Storytelling and oral tradition had started, at least as far as we know, at least since Homer. So this has been the vehicle and still is till modern Greece today. I was very impressed with the books of Frederick Buckner about journeying, that everybody's journey is a sacred journey. So I will quote from his book, Telling Secrets. In the book Telling Secrets, he writes, my story is important not because it's mine, but because the chances are that you will recognize in many ways that it is yours. Maybe nothing is more important than that we keep track, you and I, of these stories, of who we are and where we have come from, and the people who have met along the way. Because it's precisely in these stories, in all their particularity, that God makes himself known to each of us, most powerfully and personally. If this is true, it means that to lose track of our stories is to be profoundly impoverished, not only humanly, but also spiritually. So we're journeying. Close quote. In seeking the essence where I first needed and found love, shelter, play, truth, magic, and belonging, my memory always turned to my childhood and adolescence, and onwards even, to my native land, Hellas, Greece, where I first began to know the magic word home. I was born in Athens 8.5 months before the liberation of the mainland Greece from the Nazis. I was named, it was an exceptionally cold January month. And I was then named by my parents immediately, my first name, Anastasia, which in the Greek culture, it's only given after baptism. My first home was only 10 minutes from the Acropolis and the Areopagos, or Mars Hill, and the old town of Athens. So these were places that were really my playground, and I was so fortunate for that. It was a source for fun and learning and awe, and a zeal to learn how that history and those people were and are connected to me. So I will start with my immediate family. My father was born and raised in an agrarian family that owned a lot of land with orchards, vineyards, etc. And as I have learned from history and personal experience, the geography, many times of where we live and grow, makes such an important role personally, because it's so closely connected with history and personal experiences. So my father was born in Nafpaktos, a town and outside of Nafpaktos, because his parents were agrarians, about 7 miles or so, Nafpaktos was called Lepandos, and in 1571, it was a very important battle, sea battle between the United Christian Forces, that the naval force, and the Ottomans, mostly Turks and Egyptians, and the Christian Armada won, which was, they believed, and in history it's considered to be a miracle, because not only there were so many more, but it had never been defeated, and it broke the myth that they could never be defeated. And that was historically important for Europe, because it prevented them, at least for a while, to be spreading into Europe. Also, that I call it my village. My grandparents' village is very close to, it's situated in the back of the Gulf of Corinth and by the Ionian Sea, right across from the boot of Italy and more southern in the Ionian Sea, where the little island of Odysseus, Ithaca, is, and Zante, a very important island, Zakynthos, where our Solomos, who wrote our national anthem in 1823, had witnessed the free besieged in Mesolongi, the battle while they were besieged against the Ottomans for a whole year, and as they were starving, it was the Masada of the Greeks. They decided to rather die and be free than to win and be slaves, and Lord Byron was one of them that died there. So geographically, it was always connected in my mind with liberty. Also, it was the heart, the Rumelies, the heart of the uprising and for the War of Independence in 1821, after 400 years of slavery and extermination of the Greeks that rose against the Ottoman Empire, a handful of people. So geographically, always I connected that with liberty and family, because my grandparents' house and place was, besides my own immediate family, it was really a happy place, as my sons say. And they had, although they had gone through Second World War and Civil War, still the nature, their storytelling, and the way they worshipped and how we lived, and the freedom of the nature and the family and the storytelling has always been engraved in my mind. Someone said it takes a village, and in my experience and all that I know, that's true. At the same time, it takes God and a family, the immediate and the extended, and the village, again, the immediate and the extended. And as my favorite Beatles song said, it takes all the people. So my first experience that was most powerful about my relationship with God from very early age, yes, in the beginning, it was the cathedral very close to our house, the majesty and the beauty of the Gregorian chanting, where I could be transported. But what it really felt a very personal connection with God and his saints and his people was in that little village in the countryside, where even in the remote places, there are numerous little whitewashed churches out in nowhere many times, and built by some pious peasant. So far more than in the elaborate cathedrals, I could feel that God dwells there, that he is expecting me, that he is a kind God, humble, a God who has indeed come riding on a donkey to his frugal dwelling place. Like God, his saints in our country are humble and stand alongside of people. If you happen to be in church like I did on a summer day, or if you go in a day where there is a feast honoring the saints or the resurrection or Christmas, but especially the small, even little celebrations, you feel that you have been invited in the home of a friend on an occasion of a great celebration. This God, when I pushed the wooden door and I entered the little church, and I saw the Pantocrator, the one that holds everything in the middle of the ceiling, all the colorful icons and murals telling the story of Jesus and his saint, I felt like I was really in their home. And some kind, I hate to call mystical because many people have such different explanations of mystical, but I really felt a mystical connection and peace and love there and being welcomed. So this God, for me, it was not towering on top of me as judge and avenger, but I felt him by my side as forgiven and protector and understanding of human sufferings, which were a lot around there, not personal, but also because of all the wars they had just gone through. And that he has love and sympathy for our human sufferings and weaknesses to take your troubles upon himself. That was the experience that I had there. Now about my mother. If someone, and in Greece, actually, all of my family were married with with good and happy marriages, and they were arranged, not in the sense that they didn't meet each other, but they would meet with families, etc., and would do the matchmaking. My mother and father were exceptional in many ways. My father was from the southwest, from an agrarian background. My mother was from the north, from Macedonia, Greek Macedonia, near Thessaloniki, and more of a mountainous area. She was born in a village that was also very exceptional. It's considered one of the most beautiful ones in Greece in the north, called Nymphaeon because of all the snow that they had. But they came from a family that actually had escaped many years ago, her ancestors from Constantinople, from Phanari, that was the area still there of the Greeks, that they were very well educated, cosmopolitan, spoke languages, etc. And then, because of I keep saying Holocaust, but really of Smyrna and of everything that happened, they moved through Eastern Europe into Greece and were established there in Nymphaeon, and was a family of diplomats and scholars and artists. And Mom herself was a prodigy, you call it, prodigy child. By the age she was at the university or academies, they called it, that were only 3 women. She was one of those 3 at her times. And by the age of 18, she was already a teacher. And later on, she was also studied between languages, and she was very gifted in poetry and music and all these things. But most of all, she was mom, and she was really a very, very wonderful mom and person, and a really quite an important philanthropist that never wanted her name anywhere. And one of the places that she helped a lot were young women and monasteries, women's monasteries that work with prisoners and so on. And one of my experiences, especially before her death, she died by the age of 42, when I didn't even know that was something wrong with her, because she was never in pain, but she had lupus. When we anyway, I will tell you later on about the experience in the monastery, in the women's monastery, that she was instrumental in bringing water and running water, and we spent a lot of time. And that's another place where, in the quietness and stillness, and I had to be taught to be still. As you know, I like to talk and to move, but that was a great school for me, to be quiet and listen and connect. And it was a great experience in that monastery and with her and my sister. When I was about 5, and it was the Civil War, just it was over by that time. But my father was a high ranked military, but he was in a kind of branch that dealt with law and administration and law and diplomacy. So when I was 5, for my first 5 years of elementary school, I had spent all the other ones in Athens. He was sent to Macedonia, Western Macedonia, Kozani, because Macedonia and Epirus, the northern places, were especially ravaged not only by the Second World War, but the Civil War between the communists and the others, some fascists, some just regular people, and they were accusing each other of being a fascist or being a communist, and because of foreign intervention, really, that had a lot to do between the British and the Russians, that funded and helped in this terrible division. It was a terrible civil war, all are, but it was exceptionally terrible. Anyway, I was feeling most proud about my father, not only because he was a wonderful father, and my parents, they were really the ones that first taught me God and classics and all those things at home. But he was a mentor, a military man, and he had been in Second World War. That was especially brutal for Greece because they decided to stay neutral, and very few of them defeated the Italian Mussolini's army, because they refused and said no to Hitler. Hitler sent the army and the Greeks won and it was a huge humiliation for Hitler. So he decided to really exterminate Greece. So they bombed Athens and Greece, and they were exceptionally everywhere. The Nazi occupation was terrible, but as the books say, not just I say as well, that they were extremely brutal. So though my father had been through Second World War and Civil War, was a man of peace and for peace. And so he was sent to Macedonia as military governor in the sense of not a junta or anything like that, but taking care of things. And his job was in speaking with those Iron Curtain countries between the Greek government and them to repatriate people that they were either abducted. For instance, my mother's brother, because he was from a wealthy family and he was an artist and so on and so forth, he was abducted by the communists, Greek communists and foreign communists, and they thought he was dead for many years. And my dad was repatriating, helping to repatriate, and they gave immunity and forgiveness to people that were even communist and with the Communist Party, because many had started as a resistance to the Nazis, and then they were either labeled or they did join the Communist Party. So many of them, and anyway, the government gave immunity to them to come back and also to search for those that were abducted and to find out who was killed and who was not. Among that search, and with the help of the Red Cross, my father located my mother's brother that was considered to be dead for so many years. And thankfully, in 1958, before she died, and it was kind of sudden, at least for me, my mother and my grandmother that lived with us saw him. So that was another experience in Macedonia for 5 years that was very wonderful for me, as my father drove me around to see the ravaging of the war, the suffering of the people, and the love of my mother's family, who was not agrarian, but it was a different also family that stimulated, very loving, and stimulated my love for knowledge. Anyway, I don't want to take any more. After that, my trip in Macedonia, we came back, and Dad was in charge from the area, from outside Athens all the way to Corinth. So although we had always had our house in Greece, in Athens, decided to live in a place called Megara, right across from the island of Salamis, about 35 miles outside Megara, and that was also outside Athens. And that was also very important for me because I got to, as I said, with my mother, to have different experiences that I did in Athens with nature and the people there, and then back to Athens on my last year of high school as I was getting ready to go to university. Several years now between before actually moving to Athens, when I was 14 years old, something very tragic happened in my life. And in this case, at least, it's one of the reasons that the death of my mother, because I had very unanswered questions, though I had seen no one of my family, my grandparents lived to be in their hundreds, and no one of my immediate family or people really, I knew, of course, that there was death and we went and everything, and I thought of that, but nothing shook me so much than the death of my mother. And not only, of course, for missing her, but for an unfortunate answer of, we have wonderful priests, especially the ones in the village, but it so happened, the one I asked why, and my dad said, was teasing me, I don't know if he was serious or not, and saying that the other children, children, he knew babies, their first word was mama, baba, mine was why, but why? So when I went to ask one of our fathers there, and I said, but why? How can God do that, And he thought, well, a little 13-year-old, whatever, I don't know what he thought, but his answer was, because God loved her and took her. And I got so angry at him, and I said, well, what about me? Does God love me? And so that was a really, I thought, pardon me, a very stupid answer, I thought, at that time. And I still think so. And so one of the things that I was moved to really find some answers about God's nature and our human condition. It started then, and a wonderful thing happened. And so at the same time, I saw my father devastated, though he seemed to be very strong. I saw my grandmother devastated, although she tried to be wrong. My older sister got married the next year, and I thought I needed to be the one who would be strong. So I suppressed a lot, and I had all this in my mind and the questions. And so a few years happened, 2-3 years, and we went to Athens, back to Athens for my last year in high school. And these next two events I will describe to you that I was an eyewitness were also the reason of me leaving my native country because of what it had become. So my last year in high school in Greece, in Athens, the trouble already has started for politically and morally and spiritually. It's a great book if somebody would be interested in the 60s in Greece, because everything is connected, happened to the other places in the world. And it's a very non-partisan and excellent book, Children of Dictatorship, by Kostis Kornelis, Student Resistance, Cultural Politics, and the Long 60s in Greece. In that year, in the 60s, till I left for Newport in 64, problems had started with, anyway, the two generations between, let's say, 1963 and 74, the children of the dictatorship were those, the young students were those that were born between 44 and 49, and that's me, and those that were born from 49 to 51 to 52. So around 62 or so, the problem with the palace started. In 1963, May, I believe, of 1963, there was a young parliamentarian, here you will say senator, and he was with a party of, he was an independent, though he was supported by the left, but many people on the center right. And he was assassinated in Thessaloniki. He was not a communist for sure, and he was not with Russia. And those were also the people of the generation of those that leaned towards left. Actually, they were the students, they were the people that wanted, the palace had done, men, and my father was a royalist to begin with, but many things had happened. For instance, when King Paul, who was a man that was wise, I think, and the people laughed, after he died, Frederica, the later King Constantine, who was only 22 and he became king, he was very immature. People liked him, but he was very mature, and he was under the thumb of his mother, Frederica, and she was very unwise, because while people were going through financial difficulties and everything, she tried to change the constitution. Well, they had started with extravagancies, with the wedding of their oldest daughter, Sophia, with Don Juan Carlos, and then later on Constantine with Anna Maria. They said the extravagance that historians say they were as expensive as Victoria's from a little country. So the people were kind of very turned off, at least. But then after her husband's death, she tried to, and because they saw demonstrations of the left and so on, under the pretense of the fear of communism, she tried to change the constitution, and she persuaded Constantine actually to demand that he will be the head of the army. He will be the head of all army forces. And of course, like here, where a president is not supposed to use and politicize the military, in Greece as well, under the constitution. It's a strong belief, and in the course it showed quite strong evidences that the murder, and please, if you have time, please see the movie Z, like the letter Z in Greek, which means he's alive, to see, because thank God we have not lived under dictatorships here and police states, but I have. And please don't take the democracy for granted. See that movie. And it's the accurate and true events with the assassination of Lambrakis in 1963, which led then to the juntas. And already the army, a lot of the army and lower ranking officers, they were not the generals, they were the colonels, that later on they staged the coup, but they had started already. Anyway, in that assassination of Lambrakis in Thessaloniki, and later on they tried to go to courts, and you can see all the corruption and all these things, but it was a very strong indication that it was Frederica's part and planning of that assassination. It had a huge, huge impact, negative impact, especially to the youth, because his speech, even at that time, was not to join the Communist Party or anything else. He was talking about people having medical care for people, for education to be available to more people, is that, and most importantly, the corruption that we had in the courts and in the palace, and that because of foreign interventions, both of America and Russia, of the huge amount of money spent in defense, while the people had not enough to eat and to live. And for that, they killed him. So then things were just started going worse and worse. In Athens then, and I had finished my high school, and I was waiting. I had applied for philosophy and medicine, and was waiting to not apply, really take the exams. And the truth is, you only get, even if you were very good students, 3% of those that qualified to get in. But I was waiting, and there was very good indications I would get into it. So after his assassination in Athens, where I was with my family, his funeral the next day, the people of all kinds, of every generation really, they attended on foot from where the palace was all the way to the harbor of Piraeus. And I was one of them as well, with a friend who was in medicine at that time, and another friend from childhood. The consequence, and the next day, there were consistent, non-violent marches consistently every day, asking for justice, asking for the courts to find out, because they were covering things up. And the students' demands to be heard. In one of those, the police, and this book, as I say, is really non-partisan, opened fire with real bullets. One of the people that was hit was right next to me, my childhood friend, from police snipers. And later that day, he died. I have first cousins and friends in medicine and doctors. The refrigerators had all kinds of people killed and hurt. It was covered. And then people like my father, who was a royalist because he believed that constitutional monarchy for Greece, because could be a balance between opposite sides. But seeing what happened, he renounced them and actually retired later on. Before that, he was put under house arrest in the sense he could not leave Greece when the colonels took over as a junta. But at that time, my father told me, how can I say? I don't know, what was that movie that they were burning books, 1828? Oh, yeah, well. Anyway, things got a lot worse, and we come now to 1964, a year later. My father believed that I was in danger, that the political situation, and of course he was a man of intelligence, too, knew that things will get worse and I should leave the country. People, to understand that, is that people, that they were paramilitary groups sponsored by the right, and governments were changing governments, and Senate, it's true, it was kind of chaotic, but what was I, 17, 18, I don't know. What they were doing, they used all the tactics that the communists and Nazis did to their people. We were, and not even till 67, when the actual junta was actually established, but even before that, in those years, after Labranquis, they banished all the classics. See the movie and see all the list of the classics, of the Greek classics. And that's why I decided, well, I'll go to America and I'll study classics, or I will go to Newbold or whatever. They censorship, and that's why I'm so sensitive with academia when they censor books. They censored the classics, they censored all kinds of books, and we were being followed, not only politicians, children of politicians, students. They made what they called, because they found them later on, facili, that means envelopes, where they had down what newspaper you read, what if you attended church or not, what your, everything about scholars, about artists, about all of this. We had a facelo, we had an envelope in the police, not because of criminality, but of a profile of who we were. So my father said, actually, I was also planning to go to France because my English was okay. But in our school, we had no English. I was going to an institute to learn English, but I was very in French. And so I was thinking about going to France. But France also had some problems or whatever. And then by God's providence, I believe, some say by accident, one of a friend knew of someone of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Athens and of Newbold. And so in 1964, I left for Newbold, where I spent 2 years, and wonderful years. And in the next session, I'll talk about that when I talk more about Christianity. After I left, I went for a short time, a period in the summer of 1966 back home. And then I left for America. And there are lots in between, but I don't have the time. But in 1970, one wonderful thing, some of those times is, I think it was 1969 or so, when the Heart Team went, and I was a very good friend with Lavon Sutton, and the Heart Team went to Greece, and Dad took them with my extended family on a bus, on a Mercedes bus with a classicist, taking them around, showing them Greece. And they were a marvelous liaison for me, because telephones were tapped and on and so forth when they came back to communicate more with my father. But so he was allowed, well, so much to say, he was allowed in 1972 to come to Loma Linda, to my newborn baby at that time. Going forward to 1974, there were hopes that, well, before 1974, there were hopes that the first junta will fall, because there were many, many problems within its army. And it did, but one even worse came up in 1973, Ioannidis, and that's the second massacre. The massacre happened. The Polytechnic students in Athens, 2,000 of them barricaded in the university, which since ancient times has always been a place for sanctuary. 10,000 around. Well, I forgot to tell you, all this time of the juntas, their tactics were like the Nazis. It was cultural war. They came up, the first junta, the second junta, with slogans and with the using Christianity, using Byzantine symbols like the phoenix, promising a renaissance, making by force, really by law, that all students from public schools or from all schools had to attend the Orthodox Church on Sundays. Anyone with long hair that were boys, they would have their hair cut or shaved and throw them in jail. They were by the droves, the male students of 18 and sometimes younger or older, taking to that had exemptions for them to study. They sent them to, how do you call it, to the army. They took them by force to the army. And so also you will see many in the picture, in the film, many women, girls that had to take up the protest, which were totally unarmed for freedom. And as I said then, I didn't read the Things of Liberty, and the massacre, then the second junta came, and the massacre of the Polytechnic, which I'll talk a little bit, happened, where bulldozers, where tanks lined up and just went over them. And at that time, the third day happened. The first day, they were vigilant for 3 days around the university, at least 10,000 people, citizens, and even high school kids had gone there. Their only weapons were some oranges to throw, and they were barricaded inside and the university, and they made the decision, though they had labs, they could make cocktail bombs and all kinds. They decided to be unarmed, and they sang our national anthem, which was of Solomon's. There are 120 verses, if you could ever read it, one of the most beautiful
Ode to Liberty.
poetry, the Ode to Liberty, and they would sing, which goes, born out of the holy bones of the Greeks, and being courageous and become courageous again. We hail you, liberty. Hail to you, liberty. And the other one was the poetry of the free besieged, of those that had the moral victory in Mesolongi, to die rather than to live and be slaves and without freedom. And that's all they had. They were totally unarmed. And they were the bulldozers, the tanks rolled over them, literally. And that shook the whole world, actually. And they're responsible. It's because of them. It's because of them. And because everything is connected, as Aristotle said, that the world saw it and protested and supported them. And I was there in 1974 with my baby son, 2.5 years old, and 2 couples actually here from Loma Linda, because we thought that a year later, might be better. And my father said it might be safe to come for a little while. And when we were in the island of Rhodes, my father came with us. He had retired by then. He retired on purpose because of that. He warned me, do not go to the Aegean. It's going to be trouble. The dictatorship is not over. They're planning something big. But of course, I said, Dad, things are getting better. You're overprotected. So together with the other 2 couples from Loma Linda and with my father and with my 2.5-year-old son, we go to the island of Rhodes. We thought, and while there, this junta, in order to get the mind of the people away, and because really the military juntas, it's documented, and President Clinton in November of 2000 went to Greece and announced, and he asked for forgiveness of the American governments at that time, who funded, supported, and trained people for torture. Anyway, I'm jumping. So anyway, we were in Rhodes, when then this junta, seeing that they were falling, seeing that the people that had more and more protests and troubles in their military to obey them anymore, they caused another tragedy, the tragedy of Cyprus and the invasion by the Turkish military to bomb and take over most of their island. But it was the Greek junta who made the coup to overthrow Makarios, the president, who happened to be also a bishop, the president of Cyprus. So in that July of 74, with the two couples from Loma Linda and my son, my baby son, and my father, we were in Rhodes. But during the day, and we were at the beach at that time, we heard the sirens going. And my father, we arrived in Greece, I think July 10th, and it was July 15th, I believe, when the invasion, we heard the sirens in Rhodes, and police came and grabbed our cameras, because I remember Mark, and they were all physicians from Loma Linda, but our age and dear friends for the rest of my life. So we ran actually with our bathing suits in the square to see what was going on, because we had yelling and crying of mothers and children and people gathering, because there were posters and things and sirens running. Well, they took everyone from 18 to 50, I think. They declared a state of war, and they took all of the planes. Nobody could leave the island by plane or by boat. And as Mark was taking some pictures of what was going on, police came and grabbed our cameras and forbid all that. We put some clothes on. My father took us to the consulate, American consulate. Well, my father knew, because, I mean, he said, do not do that. It's you know, but it happened sooner than even he thought. And we go to the American consulate. He says, oh, well, you know, not really anything serious, but we could hear the bombing in Cyprus. And all the other countries had sent airplanes and boats to take their people. So my father, through his intelligence, found a boat, had troops in them, and put us all in, myself, the baby, Mark with his sister Elizabeth, who still lives in Loma Linda, and the other couple that they were young doctors from Loma Linda. They put us all on the troop boat to get us to Athens, and they also had to return to America. I was in Athens with my child, and something marvelous happened when I was there. There was a day after that also tanks were everywhere in Athens and in the square of Syntagma, where the palace was. And I could see from my sister's apartment, who would look down, that because the people had gathered and the tanks, and they had given the order to really do what they did to the students in the Polytechnic, to just walk over them. And then it's like an instant, that was a general orchestrating. The church bells, I'm proud of the church of that time, the church bells start ringing, and like bees out of beehives, anybody and everybody from every home and apartment, we flooded the streets. And there was an order from their officers to stop and retreat. That was the beginning of the end for the fall of the junta in July of 74. And I thank God I was there and witnessed it. And then they brought the prime minister. He happened to be center-right, amazing man. That's why it's not right or left, you know, it's what they do. And from then on, democracy was established in Greece. But before that, I forgot to read to you something about my first impressions of what liberty is. Stephen, where do I have this thing now? Oh,
Right.
oh,
Okay.
yes. From my early years, liberty, as I said, geography was very important, and I was immersed in that because of the times and the place. Liberty was not an empty glory that comes with flags and drums, ostentatious parades, which trumps and crushes people as it passes. On the contrary, in our Greek history, though its anguish, besides its anguish, identified with something real and essential and universal to make the world so that people can live in. That is man's longing to be free and just. And my father told me many times, if Greece does not have this distinct meaning, then it's not Greece. One of our writers, Xenopoulos, wrote, "Whenever a man is in danger, my children, try to rescue him, even if you are putting yourselves in danger. But if he can be saved only by losing his freedom, then do not save him. Better to die free than be saved and be a slave." So, always in my mind, I thought of Greece and freedom, not only national, but freedom of mankind, the struggle to be delivered from every oppressor, foreigner or domestic. It's the same enemy. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, that's powerful. So we end with democracy being reestablished. Let's
Yes.
think, reestablished again after so much heartache, and the home of democracy becomes democratic again. Let's take a break. It's about 11:30. Let's say 11:35 now. Let's reconvene about 11:45, and then if you have more you would like to say, we'll hear that. But then we'll have questions. Don't take democracy for granted, you said early on, and we need to hear that message. Okay, 10 minutes from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.